Hello everyone, my name is Dan, this is Exploder, back with another episode just for you. You happen to be whoever's listening to it, so take it for what it is. After a more than brief hiatus, real life gets in the way, I am back with another episode. Now, the original idea I was going to talk about was hotlines, magazines, comic books, other ways to ingest wrestling product, usually during the 90s, early 2000s, before the internet was really the big thing that we know it is. But real life got in the way, as it often does, and after the recent deaths of Brickhouse Brown, Brian Christopher, and of course Jim Neidhart, I've decided to talk about an issue that's not exactly the greatest, not exactly the funniest, but it's an issue that deals with professional wrestling in a regular way. It happens a lot, unfortunately, and that's why I'm talking about death. Death and professional wrestling, unfortunately, go together really close. Like Virgil and sadness, it goes together. Now, I'm going to warn you right now, this episode's not going to be that funny. There might be a joke here and there, but to be honest with you, it's a real issue, and dealing with death is quite often not funny, unfortunately. But before we get into this reasonably taboo topic, let's address what the difference is. First, let's break down the types of wrestling deaths. Now, any death, let me preface this, any death is unfortunate. It's sad, and when someone passes away, it is sad. So I don't mean to diminish anyone's death in anything. So if I say anything on here that's maybe seems a little too flippant, that's a fancy word, flippant for some people, about someone dying, or you think I'm disrespecting them, I totally apologize. That's not my intention. But there is a difference in deaths. So the first death we're talking about, first type of death, let's put it that way, in professional wrestling comes from the more expected. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Expected deaths are not enjoyed at all, but they're the kinds of wrestling where a wrestler is very important in their day, or very popular, maybe not so popular, but the popular ones, the ones we remember, who get to an older age and then pass away of a medical condition or just old age. I mean, Vern Gagne passed away at 89 years old. Strangler Lewis, who's a very, very old name, I'm not sure how many people even listening to this know who Strangler Lewis is. Ed Strangler Lewis, not the original. I'm getting nerdy. Strangler Lewis passed away at 75. Freddie Blassie, the man who prided himself on being stabbed by fans. Great heel that he was. Great manager even. He died at 85. Killer Kowalski died in his 70s, and so on and so forth. These are tragic, but they're not unexpected. When you hear that Vern Gagne passed away at 89 years old, it's unfortunate that he passed away, and the circumstances around his death were not the greatest, with his mental state being compromised due to, I believe, Alzheimer's. And even the stories of Strangler Lewis, I did a report on him in high school. Yeah, I'm that big of a wrestling nerd. And Strangler Lewis was blind. He was blind and lived in a nursing home in, I believe, Missouri. And I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure. And he passed away, and it's sad, but it's not unexpected to hear that an 89-year-old or a 75-year-old or 85-year-old or so on and so forth pass away. It's not unexpected. It's sad to see them go, but it's someone who had a career, who retired, and then pass away later in life. And it's the same thing if you'd find a regular person in any other walk of life who, oh, he was 89 years old and he passed away. You don't want to see someone pass away, but you understand why an 89-year-old would pass away. So it's not really that shocking. Then, on the other side, there's the truly shocking events. Now, this is a wide brush. And let me explain. When you talk about shocking, there is everything from the more common, someone who dies of a drug overdose, in the case of Buzz Sawyer, a medical condition, the likes of David Von Erich, or the very rare case, thankfully, the very rare case of someone dying in the ring. Forget Plum Rico in Japan, not exactly well known, but known for her death. She died a couple days after taking a Liger bomb, and she hit her head on the mat and died, I believe, in a hotel a couple days later. And then you have, even the guys who are on Oro in Mexico dies during a six-man tag. Not expected, not good, but I mean, to happen in the middle of a match, it's not as common, thankfully. And of course, there's the freak things like Owen Hart, or someone who's on the current roster who passes away from a company. Now, unfortunately, the 90s had a few of these. We had Brian Pillman, who was in contract with the WWE, passed away after a house show. Went to his hotel and didn't make the pay-per-view the next day. Rick Rude, Louis Spicoli, Bobby Duncombe Jr., these are guys who were working for a company and passed away while on the company dime, to put it maybe, I guess, in a crude way. They're unexpected. It's the kind of thing where someone doesn't show up for an event and you're expecting them, oh, they no-showed or whatever, and then they call and they find essentially a body, especially in the case of Brian Pillman and Eddie Guerrero. It's unexpected and it's shocking, and it's someone who works there up until their dying day. And those are always very, very shocking, you know. Or even the guys that are no longer, they get released from a company and they die shortly thereafter. We're talking about guys like Umaga, who was working for WWE and passed, and I went on a tour of Australia with one of Hulk Hogan's nostalgia tours or whatever, and passes away shortly after that from drug use. Talking about guys, or maybe a guy like Chris Candido, who's working for TNA, and unfortunately, the result, no other way to put it besides the sort of the end result of a cataclysmic connection of bad events, from breaking his leg in a freak accident to getting surgery to flying back to the United States from the surgery, which caused a blood clot, and so on and so forth. You have the guys like Pitbull number 2, Anthony Durante, who passed away of a drug overdose, or even guys who have heart conditions like Eddie Guerrero or Robert Hawk, who was not directly related to professional wrestling, but was sort of doing his own thing and his heart gave out. So there's those kinds. There's, of course, the Bobby, then there's the extreme ones. There's the Bobby Shane plane crash, killed the King Bobby Shane. Chris Cash had a car accident that killed him. And of course, like I said, David Von Erich, he had a intestinitis, I believe it was. It was a tear in his intestines where your intestines basically seep out into your stomach cavity, which is insanely dangerous. And then there are the tragedies. Now understand, every death is a tragedy in its own way. And I don't mean to diminish the other two categories by saying that these are the tragedies, but then there are those that are really the tragedies. These are usually people that often publicly lose control of their lives and become, and it may be, again, it might be a little flippant or might seem crude to say it this way, but they become train wreck. They're the people that lose so much control of their life, and it's often very public and very nasty. And sometimes when it's starting, I guess, it's fun to make fun of them, I guess. Maybe that's sort of that schadenfreude that all wrestling fans have, sort of that when you see somebody like Sunny getting her 12th DUI, and so on and so forth, it's kind of funny because it's like, oh, you know. But when it's at the levels of guys like Jake the Snake Roberts, who thankfully is still alive, Scott Hall, who's thankfully still alive and have changed their lives, but for every one of those, there are many more. There's people like China, who was on a video hours before her death. Then there's the suicide of the Renegade, Rick Wilson, who committed suicide shortly after being fired from WCW. There's Axel Rotten, who overdosed in a McDonald's bathroom in New Jersey. And again, in any other context, that'd be a funny statement. McDonald's bathroom, Axel Rotten. But it's not, because of what actually happened. Now, this, of course, was juxtaposed against, around the same time, Daniel Bryan was being forced out of wrestling, out of in-ring competition, because of concussions by the WWE for his own safety. So it's a very weird juxtaposition. You have one guy who's a former ECW guy who is elderly and he had messed up his foot or something. He was hurt and he was on drugs and he overdoses in a McDonald's bathroom alone. And then on the other end, you have a guy who's still reasonably young, actively employed by the WWE, and is against his own wishes, I guess, but being protected from basically himself. So that's a very weird, it's a combination that honestly, it really shows the business, how the business used to be and how the business, I think, is and should strive for. Our building has been Shockmaster proof since 1993. It's newsflash. Former WWE writer Court Bauer has confirmed that Randy Orton used to pull his dick out in front of new writers, then try to shake their hand. Fans agree that it's actually more exciting than anything he's done in the past few years. Impact Wrestling ratings continue to plummet. In other news, Sun rises, fire hot, and CM Punk still a jerk. In a surprising development, WWE loyalist Chris Jericho might be on his way to Impact Wrestling, which leads many fans to ask, what's Impact Wrestling? The former Grandmaster Sexay Brian Christopher recently passed away from apparent jailhouse suicide. This pisses off anyone who had Teddy Hart in their wrestling Deadpool. That'll do it for Newsflash. Let's get back to the show. Then, of course, there's the elephant in the room. That's right, the Voldemort of professional wrestling, WWE's version of a shadow, Chris Benoit. Now, Chris Benoit, his death, the death of Nancy and their young son, is truly a tragedy. Now, understand, it's been 11 years. I'm not here to relitigate what happened. I'm not here to argue this or that, or the difference between an individual and his career. I'm not here to do that. So if you think this is going to be a long discussion on motivations or things about brain damage or so-and-so, I'm not doing it. It's been 11 years. It's a tragedy. At the end of the day, it's a tragedy. Now, what your opinions on what caused it, how much brain damage was involved, how much it was just malice and forethought, steroids, whatever. I'm not getting into that. That's a whole different matter, and honestly, I'm tired of the topic. It's a tragedy no matter how you look at it, no matter where you come in from it, no matter what you think, whatever your opinion is, it's still a tragedy. 3 people lost their lives under a terrible, terrible event. Now, what separates this? What separates the Chris Benoit tragedy? What makes it different is, honestly, there's nothing to compare it against. There have been wrestlers who have died unexpectedly in car accidents. There have been people that have died of diseases like lymphoma or cancer. There have been wrestlers who have committed murder before. But there's nothing to compare with this. This is a thing unto itself because of the circumstances, because of the uncertainty. The fact that he was an active wrestler. The guy wrestled Tuesday. The guy wrestled Monday on Raw, Tuesday on ECW, his new brand, went home, had dinner with Chavo Guerrero, and then from Friday through Sunday committed 2 murders and suicide. There's nothing to compare against that. Think of the worst incident prior to this, prior to 2007, prior to June 2007. Think of the worst incident that professional wrestling had dealt with the talent and their death. Think of it. It's still never ranked up there with what happened with Chris Benoit and Nancy in 2007. There's nothing to compare it against. That's what makes it such a tragedy. And it's such a tragedy, one, for the loss of life, but then in the professional wrestling scope, if you look at wrestling, there's nothing to compare it against. There's nothing even close. There have been tragedies. If you look at Eddie Guerrero's passing was tragic, and how it happened and how it was so sudden. But Eddie Guerrero didn't commit a crime spree before he passed away. You know what I mean? Brian Pillman didn't run over somebody and then die. It wasn't anything like that. These were individual tragic events. This was compounded by the Chris Benoit issue, his maybe an altered mental state, over reliance on steroids, whatever. Again, I'm not here to litigate it. Whatever you think his motivation was, whatever you think the whole thing was about, at the end of the day, there's no easy answers and there's nothing to compare it against. That's what makes it especially heinous. And what happened that weekend were so incomprehensible, so never before duplicated before or since. Thankfully, no one knows really how to deal with it. I mean, it's like any other crime. It's like something you read out of a novel, and it really happened. And I think it's personal for wrestling fans because that was, gonna get a little personal here, but it was one of our guys. You know, if an NFL player, if someone's a big fan of football, and an NFL player, commits suicide or commits homicide, they take that a little more personally because that's one of their guys. Wrestling, Chris Benoit was, for better or worse, one of our guys. It was someone you watched on TV, someone you, up to that point, admired. So the fact that someone like him did what he did, I think wrestling fans took it a little more personal because it was our guy. And in a situation like that, and I'm sorry to say it, there's no joke I can make. There's no witty comment. I can joke about a lot of things, and I can rag on this or that. I can't make a joke about that because at the end of the day, the whole thing was a tragedy. And no witty comment I can make on a podcast or a meme or whatever is going to change that. And there's, I think, everything, and I'm a stand-up, and I believe that theoretically everything's on the table. I think you can make something, I think you can make anything funny. But in this case, maybe I'm not that good of a comedian, or maybe my mind isn't that twisted. I don't know. But to me, I don't see anything funny about this. That's why I can't make a joke. I know some people make Chris Benoit jokes and so on and so forth, and whatever. They have every right to do that, but I just can't. I don't see it as funny. I see it as a tragedy, ultimately. Then, now that we understand professional wrestling and the types of deaths, now we start getting into the nitty-gritty, the details, the minutia, if you will. I'm throwing out some fancy words today. Then you have to ask the next question when it comes to wrestling and death. What role does professional wrestling play in some of these deaths? Now, understand, when the Chris Benoit tragedy happened, and I'll get off Chris Benoit, but this is just a jumping off point. When the Chris Benoit death happened, Nancy Grace, the quivering she-beast that she is, trotted out anyone she could that didn't like professional wrestling. I'm surprised she didn't call Phil Mushnick and do horrible, horrible things with him. And they talked about people who died under the age of 35. And again, truly tragic. I mean, guys like Bam Bam Bigelow, Chris Candido, and the list goes on. But then they started making some tenuous connections to professional wrestling. Some deaths are not attributable to professional wrestling. It's just not. She brought up Mariana Lopes, who was Mrs. Cleavage. In 1999, the beaver cleavage abortion of a gimmick. Anyway, she passed away. Well, she passed away of breast cancer. I mean, there's no, show me a link between professional wrestling and breast cancer, and we'll talk. There is no. John Studd was a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Again, show me a link. There's no link there. Chris Cash, DJ Peterson. We're talking about guys who were in car accidents, motorcycle accidents, whatever vehicle it happened to be. You can't, those happen. Those happen in the general population. If you're a security guard, a professional wrestler, or a mall security guard or a trucker or whatever, a car accident can happen to anybody. You know, I drive people around. Part of my job, I am not a wrestler. I have no real connection to the business outside of being a fan and someone who just sort of helps along. I could be in a car accident tomorrow. It's possible. Now, if I am in a car accident tomorrow, that is the weirdest coincidence of all time, but I digress. So yeah, so you can't really blame that. But, okay, but on the other end, the people that are in the ring when it happens, well, that's directly attributable. Now, are the accidents? Sure. I don't know of a story of anyone purposely killing someone in the ring, you know, but again, there's Oro and there are cases of people dying in the ring, never on purpose, of course, but those are directly. Then, what about car accidents on the way to or from a show? You know, Bobby Shane, I talked about. Bobby Shane was a plane crash. Well, they were on their way, I believe, going to a show, to or from a show. I can't remember, but they were on their way from a show. Okay, that's arguable, it's attributable. Again, they could be in a car accident or a plane crash elsewhere, but the fact that they were on their way between towns, okay. Car accidents, you know, the old Jason the Terrible and the car crash where a band in Canada went off a cliff. They were on their way between shows. Okay, then it gets murky. Then we start talking about drug abuse. Now, I'm not here to make light of any drug abuse in professional wrestling. Never have, never will. I don't have this attitude where I don't care. I do care. But with that said, how much of that can you blame on professional wrestling? Buzz Sawyer died of what was essentially cocaine. I believe it was cocaine or heroin. I'm sorry about that. I don't know, but it was a drug. He had a drug in his system. He overdosed on a drug and he died. All right. So how much of that can you say it was on a personal issue, and how much can you say it was wrestling related? What about suicide? How many guys commit suicide while wrestling, and how many commit suicide years later after they wrestle? So that's when it gets murky. Is it a responsibility of the business? Now, I think any company that's large enough to employ people on a full-time basis, be it WWE or New Japan or Impact, as long as it's still around, I think anyone who employs someone full-time should have some kind of policy or some kind of ability to protect their talent. Now, you cannot protect everyone from themselves. You can't make them save for retirement. You can't make them go to the gym every day. Some just don't. You can't make them not smoke or not do drugs or not do steroids. You can try, but you're not going to make everyone. The best drug policy in the world isn't going to work on everyone. So I don't mean that it's entirely on them. There are some people that are going to do whatever they're going to do regardless. But if you work for a company in a full-time capacity, there should be something in place to try and protect them, because quite frankly, especially in the territory days, not as some grizzled veteran, but I'm saying as a fan, as someone who looks at it and sort of cobbles together things, it doesn't look like back then that the promoters really looked out for the guys. It was more of a, you know, I'll employ you, you need to make the next town. Now, if you're working 30, 40 days in a row, oh well. If you're running on no sleep, oh well. If you need drugs to stay up to get to the next town, oh well. If you go in the ring hurt or you get concussions or whatever, oh well. That does not breed safety. That does not breed a generation that really is prepared for life after wrestling, or prepared for wrestling at all. I mean, how many guys pass away, you know, Gino Hernandez or Art Barr, or somebody who passes away in their prime, essentially. And sometimes it's attributable to guys who just can't, I don't want to mean they can't hang, and I don't want to be anything detrimental to them, like they can't hang, but honestly, it's guys who can't do what a lot of other people are doing. And what the guys are doing, the guys that are doing it, the guys that are handling their drugs, the guys that are drinking too much, the guys that are getting a little buzzed and then driving to the next town, or driving sleep deprived, or doing copious amounts of alcohol and drugs and things like that, they're doing it doesn't mean it's healthy. And those are the same people that contributes to a heart problem later on in life. Maybe that's why someone passes away at 40. Maybe that's why Terry Gordy had a stroke years later, and people who knew him afterwards said he was never the same, that he was slower because of the stroke. Maybe that kind of lifestyle eventually has a stopping point. You know, there's the old saying that everyone has a bump card. They have a bump card. So you have a number of bumps, and then after that number, you can't do it anymore, unless your name's Terry Funk, who will outlive all of us. He will. Terry Funk will outlive all of us. But everyone else has a bump card. You have a number, you punch it, and when you finally get that last bump, you're done. Unfortunately, as we found out, too many guys and girls have that when it comes to drugs, and it comes to alcohol, and it comes to addictions. And I don't want to diminish anyone's addictions. I don't want to say that I don't want to be one of those jackasses in their trucks who sit and look at a camera and post it on Facebook talking about how they know so much about addiction. I'm not going to be that guy. Addiction is very terrible. And if you don't think it is, suck it. I have nothing nice to say to someone who just doesn't understand. However, there is something to say about guys and girls, men and women who continue this lifestyle. And that's why, unfortunately, a lot of them pass away. Sensational Sherry, Luna Vachon, both passed away in very similar circumstances. And it was the result of years and years and years of abuse. And Miss Elizabeth, another tragic case, you know, one of those wholesome characters in professional wrestling history, and she passed away because of her drug problem. So I'm not trying to make this about whether it's wrestling's fault or not. I think there should be some steps to try and prevent it, but at the same time, on a human level, people need to take care of each other. People need to take care of themselves. There needs to be a program to help people. If they are on something, they need to get off. That's why I love WWE's wellness policy. I love the fact that they have former talent who can come in and go to rehab, and it saved lives. I love the fact that Dime Doss Page is working with certain people to do DDP yoga and eat right and deal with their demons. In the case of Jake Roberts and Scott Hall, who both of which very well could have been on this list as much as a couple years ago. So I love that. I love that there's something to do. Death is unfortunately very common in professional wrestling. I think that it can be less common if things come together, people care about each other, people care about themselves. So I hope this wasn't too boring for you. I hope this wasn't too serious and too dour. What the heck am I doing with words today? I'm throwing these really weird, I mean, I'm not doing this on purpose, I assure you, but I hope it wasn't too down on this. I love professional wrestling, and I will always love professional wrestling, and there are things that are good and there are things that are bad, but I think that's the beauty of wrestling is you need to really love something. You have to look at it warts and all, as the old expression goes. Look at the good, look at the bad, and enjoy what's good, and realize that some things need change. You know, we're dealing now. That's why now we're dealing with things like CTE, which was something that 20, 30 years ago wasn't as big a deal, especially in wrestling. People didn't think about it. But an unprotected chair shot to the head, we're seeing results of that. We're seeing that, and I think that's something where you modify. So yeah, maybe we get rid of chair shots to the head like that. You know, it's a small detail. And some people say, oh, they're traditionalists. You know what? I would rather miss a shot to the head. I don't want to see someone get hit in the head with a chair shot if it means they're going to live to remember their graves. I'm okay with that. As a wrestling fan, I'm okay with that. As a person, I'm okay with that. So there's nothing wrong with changing professional wrestling. There's nothing wrong with it changing your expectations as time goes on. So again, I hope this wasn't too down. I hope it wasn't too serious. I try to be fun with this, and I try to throw a joke in now and again. And of course, this isn't a funny topic, but it's a real topic, and it's a topic that needs to be covered. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope somebody listened to this, and I hope that those that did understand where I'm coming from. If you have any ideas, if you have any topic ideas for future episodes, send them on here. Put them below the video, message the page on Facebook, whatever. Email, whatever you need to do. Get a hold of me. I've got a couple ideas. The next one, I promise, is going to be more funny. I'm going to do more fun stuff and have some more fun with it, but I just had to get this topic out. It was topical, and I just thought, hey, why not? So, with that in mind, until next time, my name's Dan. This is Exploder. Have a good one.